Hello and a very warm welcome to a brand new edition of World Panorama with me, Frank Pereira. Here are the latest international headlines. Prime Minister Narendra Modi in Australia for the G20 summit. Before leaving for Brisbane, Modi asks for sustained dialogue among all stakeholders at the East Asia summit in Myanmar. India-US deal revives WTO and hope of world trade reform. Obama commends India's personal leadership in resolving the WTO impasse. Islamic State looks to squash rumours of the killing of its leader Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi, releases a voice message claimed to be that of Baghdadi vowing to fight to the last man. Despite technical problems, European probe lands successfully on a comet. Scientists hope that the mission will unlock details about how the planets and possibly even life evolved. Top focus on the show this week. Prime Minister Narendra Modi is in Brisbane, Australia for the second leg of his three-nation tour. Modi is in Brisbane to attend the G20 summit. Modi arrived in Brisbane on Friday from Myanmar. Narendra Modi is the first Indian Prime Minister to visit Australia since Rajiv Gandhi in 1986. At the G20 summit, the Prime Minister is expected to voice concerns over jobless growth and stress that economic growth should also create employment. The Prime Minister left Myanmar on Thursday after the East Asia summit. Modi had asserted in KP Thor that the world community must reject any linkage between religion and terrorism while formulating a genuinely international partnership in the fight against all forms of terror acts. Joining me on the show this week is Pramit Choudhary, Foreign Affairs Editor of the Hindustan Times. Welcome to the show, Pramit. Let's talk about Prime Minister Narendra Modi's three-nation visit now. A very crucial visit as far as the nation and as far as the world is concerned as well. Let's break it up, of course, into three segments and first talk about Myanmar. What do you make of Prime Minister Modi's visit to Myanmar?
Well, I think Myanmar has been the missing piece for his South Asia policy. You'll notice that he did not invite the Myanmar president for his inauguration. They invited invited SARC members, but Myanmar is not a member of the SARC, obviously. But it has like a 1,400-kilometer border with India. And so far, he has not had that much engagement with the Myanmar government. So this is an important act because Myanmar is important for us for two reasons. One has been the fact that we have now been able to reduce the degree of political violence and insurgency in the Northeast to a record low. This is the perfect time now for us to consolidate the Northeast economically so that that peace continues. But we have three neighboring countries, or four neighboring countries, Nepal, Bangladesh, Myanmar, and China, who are crucial. Bhutan is also there, but Bhutan obviously is not an issue as far as the political violence is concerned. So the strategy that was developed even in the previous government was to integrate the Northeast economically with Bangladesh in the south and with Myanmar to the west, to the east. So you were going to then build connectivity across these three areas, the Northeast, Bangladesh, and Myanmar, and allow, in effect, the Northeast to become an extension and also join the Indian and Southeast Asian economies via this area. So we had planned a land border agreement with Bangladesh, and we began, when Manmohan Singh went to Myanmar, the beginnings of a large agreement with Myanmar to build, for example, the trilateral highway that would run from northeast all the way down to Thailand, and eventually the idea was to convert it all the way to Vietnam, make it actually a quintilateral highway. So all of these are in place, but we have moved very slowly on them. Classically, I think with the UPA2 government, they had good ideas, but they were terrible on the implementation. So Modi has come in and endorsed all of these, and he has said these are all very good. Now we have to start getting these things done. We have to start building the bridges, the roads, the highways, the ports that we have promised to do. And unfortunately, he's quite correct. In Myanmar, when you go there, and when I've gone there, they've always said, you all have very good ideas, but you never do anything. You just talk. And in fact, not one single project that India has proposed to Myanmar has been completed. The dams, the highways, the ports, never have we actually finished one of the projects. So for Modi, the game is really we have to fulfill our rolling and actually get things on the ground. And that's what he is basically was pushing to see what can be done on that front.
Let's talk about the G20 summit. Now, of course, Modi has begun his second leg of his three-nation tour. He's in Australia, the first Prime Minister from India to visit that country in almost 3 decades.
Yes.
Now, talking about G20, how significant is the G20 summit from an Indian point of view?
Well, the G20 is the most important international economic gathering right now. The G8 is no longer in existence, and the G7 doesn't matter too much because it keeps out China, India, Brazil is not that effective. The G20 really came into its being, really came into its own after the global financial crisis, and the so-called Pittsburgh summit that followed was probably its most successful. Since then, it's been struggling. There's not been as much coherence between the various economies, and this is G20 actually plus 2 more countries have been invited. Most times the host country will invite 1 or 2 of its own friends to the conference. So in this case, we have a couple of specific, everybody will come in with a different agenda, but I think the key issues for all the governments, one is how do you get economic growth in the world economy back on track? The economy right now, the world is growing together probably at less than about 1%. And with China slowing down dramatically, I think that figure itself may be difficult. So we have gone in, and obviously India, even with our lower growth rate of 5, we are still doing better than the global average. But obviously, so what all the countries are doing when they come in is to propose a set of proposals of policies that they will enact domestically to ensure that collectively, theoretically, if all of this was done, then the world economy should grow at about 2 to 3%.
Indeed.
Yeah, and so Modi will actually use this as an opportunity, I'm sure, to sell exactly the same economic policies that he's been selling at home.
Make in India.
Yeah, all of the Make in India, FDI policy, opening up in insurance, defense, and so on, GST, and so on. And then he'll basically, the credibility of Modi will lie in what he does over the next 2 budgets, the budget session and the winter session, is that I, unlike a lot of other governments, will fulfill what I want to do. And because he has got a huge majority in the lower house, he's in a better position than most other governments to fulfill that. So in many ways, this will help boost India's credibility globally, that he'll come in with a list of things to do. And then if he actually does them over the next 6 months, then at the next G20, everybody look at India, these guys actually, they walk the talk, right? Now, there are some other issues, though, and I think a crucial one is going to be taxation. There are a number of problems. One of them, of course, is this fact that most governments argue, I think most economists would agree, that the complexity of the international tax structure now is so strong and so complicated with tax havens and front companies and back and forth transfer that large corporations in particular are in a position to reduce their tax rates to almost nothing. And if you look at the top 100 corporations, they barely pay 5 or 6% tax, sometimes as little as 11 or 12, even though a domestic company that often has to pay 30%. So clearly something on that is happening. How do you change that? How do you get that transparency in the system? But another problem is a different issue. As you know, the core of the international taxation system is the so-called double taxation system, which is that if I pay tax to country A, I don't have to pay it to country B again if I go there or happen to be living in that country. Now, the world is built on this entire network. A lot of countries are now breaking the double taxation system. They are unilaterally abrogating these treaties. This will cause chaos if that actually happens, because at this point then, every time, for example, you go overseas, and if you give a lecture and are paid even just $300, the American government will say, you have to pay us tax, and then you come back to India and then you have to pay us tax. At the end, you'll get almost very little. And if corporations have faced this problem, after a while, they'll say there's no point in investing overseas.
Indeed. And finally, of course, before I let you go, let's quickly talk about the bilateral relationship between Australia and India. We've come a long way since 1998, haven't we?
Yeah. No, as you know, last time Tony Abbott came to India, he signed a civil nuclear understanding with us. India and Australia are sort of an obvious match because you have Australia. Australia in the next 10 years is going to be the world's largest energy exporter. Oil, gas, coal, uranium put together, it'll be bigger than any other country in the world. And we obviously are desperately short of energy and short of almost everything in terms of fuel. So there's a certain degree of convergence here that we can work on. And as you know, Modi will be spending almost 4 days in Australia, very unusual for him. But he'll be hitting a lot of these areas and doing exactly what he did in America, looking at the Indian community in Australia and trying to build up a relationship with them. Indians are now the second largest immigrant population in that country.
Yes, indeed.
And therefore he sees the potential, and Modi has been very big on this, that Indian diaspora is a political, a diplomatic instrument that we are not using in the proper manner. And he's planting the seeds for that in the future.
All right, we'll have to leave to that. Thank you so much, Pramit Choudhary, for joining us on the program this week and putting things into perspective for us. Moving on, now the centre said that it has agreed to an indefinite peace clause on food security with the United States, so a public food stock holding for food security. This means a go-ahead for the landmark trade facilitation agreement that India had refused to sign, linking it to the issue of rural poverty in the country. Here's a detailed report.
The standoff has finally ended. On Thursday, India signalled the WTO trade facilitation deal could now go ahead.
We are extremely happy that India and the United States of America have successfully resolved their differences relating to the issue of public stock holding for food security purposes in the WTO in a manner that addresses our concerns.
The trade facilitation deal was stalled because India wanted to keep a peace clause that protected its food procurements and food security concerns till the WTO struck a definitive deal. India's present proposal will now be reviewed by the WTO General Council next month.
We urge the WTO membership to take this forward in the General Council on behalf of the Ministerial Conference and pave the way to spurring the WTO to much more such successes.
The left, however, asked the government to reveal the terms it has agreed on the trade facilitation agreement.
We don't know what India has agreed to, because the USA is very clear they want unbridled access to our agricultural markets.
In the December 2013 Bali conference, India expressed concerns that agreeing to trade protocols could compromise its food security plans. The WTO agreement removes trade barriers but caps food subsidies to 10% of total food grain production. India objected to the calculation of subsidies that took 1986 as the base year and completely ignored inflation and currency fluctuation. India agreed to the facilitation agreement in Bali only under the condition that developing nations will get interim relief and face no sanctions till 2017. The present agreement between India and US comes just before the G20 summit this month that will see the presence of both US President Barack Obama and Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi.
Moving on now, there's been a big diplomatic breakthrough between China and Japan. The leaders of both the nations met on the sidelines of the APEC summit in Beijing, the first time they have done so since either of them came to office. Relations have been cold, sometimes even bordering on hostile for the last 2 years, over a bunch of uninhabited islands in the East China Sea. Here's more.
The wheels of diplomacy grind ever so slowly, but grind they do. And here's why. Japanese Prime Minister Shinzo Abe arriving at the Great Hall of the People in Beijing for the APEC summit. Abe was the first to arrive, a clear departure from protocol. And then, the moment that the world has been waiting for, as the Chinese President Xi Jinping shakes hands with the Japanese Prime Minister. This is a photo op for posterity, and then a tentative handshake. After the tenuous greeting, both leaders met behind closed doors. That meeting, though, was not open to the media. This momentous diplomatic breakthrough coming just 3 days after both countries agreed to work on improving ties. China and Japan have been at loggerheads for the last 2 years over these rocky islands in the East China Sea where no human being lives. These islands are merely 7.5 square kilometers, but they have the potential of sparking off a war between the two biggest economies of Asia. China calls them Diaoyu, Japan Senkakus. Back in Beijing, this diplomatic coup has not gone unnoticed. The Americans in particular are breathing a huge sigh of relief.
I want to be clear that the United States welcomes this initiative. We think that any steps that the two countries can take to improve the relationship and reduce the tensions is helpful not just to those two countries, but it's helpful to the region.
But building sustainable, long-term peace between Beijing and Tokyo can be an onerous task. China wants Prime Minister Abe to stop his visits to the controversial Yasukuni Shrine. Such a promise, though, would be politically suicidal for Abe and his conservative credentials.
Well, it's time for a short break on the show now, but still to come, a photograph is beamed back from the European probe that's safely anchored on a comet, a first in space exploration and the climax of a 10-year odyssey. That and much more. Stay tuned, we'll be right back. Welcome back. You're watching World Panorama on Rajya Sabha television. Well, nearly a week after he was rumoured killed, Islamic State chief Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi has apparently surfaced alive, or at least the Islamic State claims as much. The militant group has released an audio tape it says was recorded by Baghdadi. The recording, released via social media, promises what he calls volcanoes of jihad and dismissing the United States as terrified and meek. It hits out Obama's decision to deploy added troops in Iraq. The IS leader was said to have been killed in a US-led airstrike near the Iraqi city of Mosul last week.
Our campaign against ISIL has made progress, but ISIL continues to represent a serious threat to American interests, our allies in the Middle East. As a coalition and as a nation, we must prepare for a long and difficult struggle. There will be setbacks, but we are seeing steady and sustainable progress.
Moving on now, a European probe that landed on a comet in a first for space exploration is safely anchored on the surface despite technical problems. Pictures beamed 500 million kilometers back to Earth showed that all's well with the probe. Here's a report. The European Space Agency's comet lander named Philae was launched from its mothership Rosetta on Wednesday as it orbited a comet, the climax of a 10-year odyssey for the agency. But during Philae's 7-hour descent to the comet, harpoons designed to anchor it failed to deploy, raising concerns the lander might drift back into space.
Now, what we know is that we touched down, so we landed at the comet at the time when you all saw us cheering and when it was announced. We had a very clear signal there, and we also received data from the lander, housekeeping data, and also science data. That's the very good news. Not so good news is that the anchoring harpoons apparently did not fire. So the lander is not anchored to the surface.
However, the ESA published an image on Thursday of the 100 kg lander virtually weightless in its current environment on the comet's bleak rocky surface. It said data showed the lander had twice bounced back into space after touching down on Wednesday, but then came to rest.
No, science came throughout the descent, so that phase is already over. So we have science data coming, we have pictures, we have measurements from all the instruments that were active during the descent. The science continue coming. Of course, the scientific experiments will start a bit later, but the measurements for the instruments which were already active and they are active now are coming.
Scientists hope that samples drilled out from the comet by Philae will unlock details about how the planets and possibly even life evolved, as the rock and ice that make up comets preserve ancient organic molecules like a time capsule. Comets date back to the formation of the solar system some 4.6 billion years ago. Scientists suspect impacting comets delivered water to early Earth. Bureau Report, Rajya Sabha Television. Well, much else has been unfolding around the world. Here's a quick wrap of the other international news of the week.
NATO has reported significant new Russian troop movements into Ukraine. NATO's top military commander said convoys of tanks, artillery and combat troops were streaming over the border in what appear to be preparations for renewed military action. Western officials seemed ready to acknowledge that a ceasefire agreement signed in September had fallen apart. Families and friends of the 298 victims killed in the downing of Malaysia Airlines flight MH17 paid tribute to their loved ones at a national commemoration ceremony in Amsterdam. More than 1,600 relatives and friends of the crash victims attended the ceremony that was organized by the government. Nearly 200 of the plane's 298 victims came from the Netherlands. The plane was allegedly shot down by pro-Russian rebels over Ukraine in July. At least 46 students were killed by a suicide bomber at a school in Nigeria on Monday. The explosion was caused by a suicide bomber dressed as a student. According to survivors, around 2,000 students had gathered when the explosion tore through the school hall. Militant group Boko Haram is believed to have carried out the attack. The group has carried out several deadly attacks on schools in the past. The WHO has said the number of people killed by Ebola has risen to over 5,000. The frequency of new cases no longer appears to be increasing in Guinea and Liberia, but remains high in Sierra Leone. The Ebola outbreak is thought to have infected more than 14,000 people, almost all of them in West Africa. The United Nations said Afghan opium cultivation hit a historic high in 2014, up 17% since last year. Most poppies are still grown in southern Helmand province, where British troops were stationed until October. Billions of dollars have been spent trying to eradicate opium poppies in Afghanistan since the US-led troops ousted the Taliban in 2001.
Shifting gears now, it's time to bring you up to speed with all the sports news that you might have missed out on this week. Here's all the sports action. Bayern Munich manager Pep Guardiola said that he would never return to Camp Nou to coach his former club Barcelona. Guardiola stated that in terms of principle, he would not coach Barcelona again as he believes that his cycle at the club has ended. During his tenure as the manager at Camp Nou, Barcelona won La Liga thrice, 2 Champions League titles, 2 Copa del Reys and the UEFA Super Cup and FIFA Club World Cup twice. Confirming his stay at Chelsea, the Brazilian attacking midfielder Oscar has signed an accord with the club that would keep him at Stamford Bridge until 2019. Making consistent appearances in Chelsea's lineup, manager Jose Mourinho spared no time in sealing a new deal with him. Oscar is currently in his 3rd season at the club. Former Manchester United manager David Moyes has been announced as the new manager of Spanish club Real Sociedad, poised to take charge for the first time at Deportivo on the 22nd of November. Signing a contract till June 2016, Sociedad has reached a consensus with Moyes. In a recent interview with BBC, Moyes had expressed his desire to return to coach. Moyes believes that his latest assignment will give him good exposure. Former Australian cricketer and legendary commentator Richie Benaud has revealed that he is ready to call again despite his ongoing battle with skin cancer. Benaud, who made his first public appearance in more than a year on Monday, is preparing to call his final summer of cricket while undergoing chemotherapy for skin cancer. The 84-year-old has not slowed down his will to get behind the microphone again. Backing Jenson Button, 2-time world champion Fernando Alonso has admitted that he hopes to see the Briton remaining in Formula 1 next season. The Spaniard believes that Button is a very talented driver who doesn't need to prove anything as a world champion. He further said that it would be good for their sport if Button stays as people really like him. Well, moving on, now here's a look at what's creating a buzz in the world of show business. Here's our latest entertainment wrap.
Robin Williams may have taken his own life, but his suicide was driven by a disease called Lewy body dementia. According to his family and the actor's doctors, Williams was suffering from the horrible disease, which was the key factor that drove him to kill himself. Lewy body dementia is a condition closely associated with Parkinson's disease, and the people who are troubled by both often face severe side effects from Parkinson's medicines. Quentin Tarantino has revealed that he plans to retire once he was done with his 10th film. The 51-year-old Oscar-winning director said that he felt it was unnecessary to keep working, and he liked the idea of leaving his fans wanting a bit more. The director, who is currently promoting his new project, The Hateful Eight, added that he had 2 more to go to mark 10. Joseph Gordon-Levitt will be portraying Edward Snowden in the upcoming Oliver Stone project. The 33-year-old actor's confirmation to star in the film comes in the wake of the recent documentary on Snowden titled Citizen 4.
Edward Joseph Snowden's the full name.
The movie, which is based on the 2 books documenting Snowden's well-known release of NSA documents, is anticipated to start production in Munich in January 2015. The Osbournes are ready to make a TV comeback in 2015. Sharon Osbourne revealed that the TV show starring her family, including her husband Ozzy Osbourne, will return to the small screen. The show, which is anticipated to start filming early in 2015, won't air on its original network MTV, and instead of being a proper series, it would be a 6 to 8 episode update on their current lives. The Osbournes, which ran from 2002 to 2005, had won an Emmy for Outstanding Reality TV Program. Jeff Goldblum tied the knot with fiancée Emily Livingston in the presence of family and friends in Los Angeles recently. The 62-year-old actor had been dating 31-year-old rhythmic gymnast for over 2 years and had proposed to her in July during their vacation in Hawaii. Goldblum has been married twice before.
And finally, a design competition is hoping to feed over 1 million hungry New Yorkers in a canny way this Thanksgiving season. Titled Construction, the annual competition challenges designers, architects and engineers to build giant sculptures out of unopened canned foods. After an exhibition, the canned goods will be donated to the needy. I'm going to leave you with these visuals, but before I go, let me inform you that you can catch us on Facebook and follow us on Twitter. The handles are flashing at the bottom of your screens. That's it from me. See you again next week.